And global affairs analyst Sam Fatty joins us now from Washington, D.C. to discuss this. Good to have you join us, Sam Fatty. Now, what do you make of this explosion in Lebanon, especially as reports are coming in that it was occasioned by ammonium nitrate stored in a warehouse for years and in a populated area?
Well, first off, this will have very serious political and economic implications for Lebanon and Beirut especially. The city is completely in rubble and has to be rebuilt. Pretty much what has happened has sealed the collapse of Beirut. It has some very significant social implications and also economic implications. We are talking about at least 1,200 deaths. More than 300,000 people are currently going to be looking for new places or homes to stay. This is a country that is already dealing with the Syrian refugees that is coming into the country. So there's going to be some serious slashback on the political class. And as you already know, Prime Minister Diab has called an emergency meeting and several arrests have already been made. But the question is that enough for the people to calm down? And it looks like once this whole thing settles down in the next coming days, we might see some people on the streets in Lebanon.
Before we get to protests, because we've seen sporadic protests in Lebanon since last year, but the local currency has lost about 80% of its value. We know that commodity prices are up by 50%. All of this amid a pandemic. So how does this explosion add to the crisis in Lebanon?
Well, the explosion pretty much sealed the devastation that is going to happen in Lebanon for the next few years. It's going to take years for the country's economy to already rebuild from the already existing crises that are already happening. So add this particular blast to it, it extends the length of time that is needed in order to revive the economy. And Lebanon is already in a recession. There's no doubt about that. And that is already causing political tension in the country. So you add this to it, it's going to extend that. We're talking about a city that is completely flattened now and has to be rebuilt all over again. It's pretty much the same amount of effort that has been done after the civil war in 1990 to rebuild Lebanon. They have to do twice more work than that in order to rebuild this country and regain its lost ground. It's going to take them years, probably half a decade, just to start up.
So, like you rightly said, Lebanon has been dealing with sporadic anti-government protests since last year over what they describe as corruption in governance and bad decisions or policies coming from government. Do you think that this explosion and the reason for this explosion gives some sort of credibility to the protest since last year?
It absolutely does. Well, mostly the protest is about holding the political class accountable. How do you have ammonium nitrate and very explosive material stored in a warehouse at the seaport for 6 years without proper measures being taken place? There is going to be no excuse for it. And the Lebanese citizens are already blaming the government. And they are blaming negligence and corruption on top of that, which they have been decrying throughout these protests that have been happening over the years in Lebanon. And they are blaming the same factors, negligence and corruption, for what had happened. Now, that is why I am saying, even though that some of the leaders at the ports and in certain departments have been arrested and put on house arrest, it's not going to be enough. From the moment that this blast happened, and it was clear that it was from the storage of such explosive materials in the ports, Lebanese citizens started blaming the political class. Even though Prime Minister Diab and President Aoun said that they are going to take action, the people are already saying, they are telling the media that the president and the prime minister and their ministers and that government have to be the first people to be held accountable. So that tells you how angry people are and how this is just pretty much going to add to that anger.
Economic depression in Lebanon, overstretched healthcare system as a result of the explosion and the pandemic, and the projections of protests, on the streets, like you just said. Could this be a tipping point for Lebanon?
It is absolutely close to a tipping point. If not, it's going to be the turning point. We would have to see major arrests and major resignations from the government in order to calm some of the tension at some point, but it's not going to completely calm everything down. Now, one of the things that we must fear the most, of course, with this whole pandemic going on, is the amount of stretch it's going to have on the healthcare system. Some of the hospitals already in Beirut are already closed because the ceilings are falling from the blast. They are trying to evacuate some of the people. Nurses this morning were standing outside a major Beirut hospital, couldn't go in. When people go out on the streets, that means Beirut may see an increase in the number of coronavirus infections. How is this country going to handle this? That's a big question, despite the help coming from the U.S., some of the Gulf states, and even from Iran. Mind you, if you look at the economics of things too, despite the fact that some of the Gulf states are coming in to help, some of these countries do not have very good relations with Lebanon as we speak, but they are offering some help. Now the question is, how will the international politics of all of that work?
Global Affairs analyst Sam Fateh, thanks for sharing your perspective with us.